Recording now.
Okay, we are recording.
All right, so with that, Alex, if you'd like to take it away and introduce us to CVE benchmarking.
I would love to, but Zoom tells me that host disabled participant screen sharing. So if host could give me permissions, that'd be great.
Let's see if we can figure this out.
Yes, just a second here. We'll get you going here.
Thank you.
Oh, wait. This is very strange.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this too.
Yeah, oddly enough, there's no particular option for that. I think we may just have to allow.
Okay, it's under the security button apparently. Bash, want to try again?
Here we go.
Excellent.
Right, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Right. So, as you probably all know by now, in the working group for security tooling, we've been working on an initiative called CVE benchmarking, and I just quickly wanted to talk you through the basics of it so that we can have a conversation about a few open questions in a moment. So very quickly, why do we even want to do this? Well, the question to ask ourselves is really, why don't we want to use real data? And the problem was previously it was fairly infeasible due to a lack of data, and now it's a lot better. On top of that, the alternatives to using real vulnerabilities for benchmarking our security tools are not so great. We know that real vulnerabilities are not quite the same as synthetic vulnerabilities, and that synthetic benchmark code bases that are used very often quickly get out of date. Last but not least, we can't really measure false positives very well on such code bases. If you want to hear the full story, then I of course invite you to join the Black Hat conference early December. I finished my recording of my talk yesterday, so it's all being edited as we speak. So where are we now with this? We have a first data set for JavaScript and TypeScript with just over 200 CVEs in it. That data set consists of both vulnerable and patched code. So that's really 2 commits per affected code base per CVE, and some metadata for every single one of those CVEs that tells us exactly where we should expect a security tool to flag up a vulnerability. Then we have tooling around that benchmark data set for running it, basically feeding a set of security tools these CVEs and determining whether those security tools cover the CVE or not. At the moment, we support ESLint, Node.js, CodeQL, and Fortify for that. And like I mentioned just now, I recorded our Black Hat talk for this together with my colleague Kevin Backhouse yesterday, and it will be, I guess broadcast is the right word, on the 9th of December at Black Hat. So a picture speaks 1,000 words, I think is the expression. So this is the web interface of the reporting tool. I'm just showing you a screenshot again for the interactive demo. You're going to have to join Black Hat. But it shows you for each of the tools in 5 different columns in this case, for every single CVE in the data set, whether a tool detected the CVE, whether the tool then recognized the patch, or whether it did neither. And then it computes a relative score and a ranking based on that. I mean, when you see it like this, it's all fairly simple. It's taken us a fair amount of time to get the data set together. Next steps on this, all to be determined, but the ideas go in sort of the following directions. Of course, we want to get feedback from the community. We'll have the Q&A session at Black Hat, hopefully some contributions. Maybe people will reach out on Twitter, who knows. We're thinking of running and hosting regularly updated dashboards with those results, similar to the dashboard that I showed just now. There's a few tricky problems to solve with licensing. Some, especially commercial enterprise vendors, don't like it when you publish benchmark results. we definitely want to add more data to the data set. And that includes data for other languages, not just JavaScript and TypeScript. We also look to extend the tooling so that people can seamlessly run this on cloud infrastructure, sort of massively parallel. And that brings me to the open questions that we discussed in issue number 35 in the TAC repo. There's three main ones here. Decide a license, potentially coordinate any media outreach if we want to do any around Black Hat, and ideally would have these two questions answered before Black Hat itself, a few days before. Then there's one open question about the ownership of the repo, just a sort of technical ownership to transfer that to the Linux Foundation. And I previously suggested that we do that after I recorded the talk, but the team are still in process of actually tweaking some of those repositories. So my new proposal would be to do that just after Black Hat, so sort of around the 9th or the 10th of December, or a bit later. I don't really mind. So let's do maybe some questions and then get to maybe answering some of those questions.
Hey Bass, this is Crow from Red Hat. I think you answered my question, but let me purposefully ask it. What types of scanners were you using in your evaluation? Was it a mixture of FOSS and commercial?
Yep.
Okay.
So the in this screenshot, I've deliberately, and also for Black Hat, I've deliberately taken out the names of the tools. I didn't want this to turn into a vendor pitch of any sort. I didn't want to give anyone any advice on which tools they should be using or shouldn't be using. So for this particular comparison, we used all the tools currently. Where did I put the list of tools? I put it somewhere. Here we go. We used all of ESLint, Node.js, Can, CodeQL, and Fortify. And I think for one tool, we used 2 different versions.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Good work.
Thanks.
Very interesting.
Hey, boss. 2 questions. So one is, you mentioned that, so this tool runs against a data set of real CVEs, and you contrasted that to running against synthetic data. And so I wonder, are there other tools similar to CVE benchmarking out there that run against synthetic data?
Yes. So synthetic data out there, there's a lot of deliberately vulnerable repositories. A very, very sort of famous and funny one is OWASP's Juice Shop, which does exactly what it says on the tin, if you're allowed to pun. It sells juice, but it's not actually selling juice. It's a web application that you can hack. And you can then test your own tools to see whether they would have found all of these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, SQL injection vulnerabilities, and so on. And there's many of such deliberately vulnerable code bases on GitHub.
If I can jump in and add, also NIST has a whole project, Summate, that among other things has a large set of mostly synthetic. There are a few real ones, but it's mostly synthetic test suites. The big subset, something called Juliet, which
Correct.
is a whole bunch of which is entirely synthetic.
Yeah, so actually the Juliet test cases make an appearance in the Black Hat talk. So Kevin Backhouse, my colleague from the security lab, actually shows you a few of those vulnerabilities to explain what the problems are. I mean, of course, doing these synthetic benchmarks is better than doing nothing at all. But we're basically suggesting that this is even better.
Okay. Another question. So you have a set of tools that that this works with. Are you allowing others to use their provide their own tools that can also be used in this testing, or even if they don't provide them and make them public, but maybe they just use your data
Yeah.
for their own testing?
That's definitely an omission on this page over here.
Okay.
We encourage folks to write their own tool drivers, as we call them. These are very small. I mean, the whole benchmarking framework has been set up very it's been designed to support exactly the use case that you mentioned just now. It
Okay.
takes you about 200 lines of code to write a new driver typically. And then you can basically integrate whatever tool you would like to benchmark, whether it's grep or a commercial tool or you name it.
Okay. All right, great. And then my last question is, can you share this deck? I know that you're keeping things under wrap until Black Hat, but there's some slides here that I'd love to copy and use in future presentations about OpenSSF after Black Hat.
Of course. If you're looking to wait until after Black Hat anyway, then I'm happy to share you both the Black Hat slide deck and this one.
Yeah,
the Black Hat one is a bit longer, obviously.
Right. Okay. Yeah, if you can share this one now, no, that'd be great, and then the Black Hat one later.
Yep, we'll do.
Okay, thanks.
So on the license slide, you had a question there. I think we discussed this on the issue a little bit too.
Dan, you sound like you're in a tunnel.
Ooh, sorry. You try switching something.
It sounds like you've got two microphones running at the same time.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Somewhat.
Okay.
Somewhat.
Sorry. So I think the policy that we have says Apache is our acceptable license, and we could ask the governing board for an exception here. Is Apache going to be fine? Or
so there's I've gotten a few different sort of messages. Actually, the FAQ on the OpenSSF website says that every working group is free to choose their own license. Indeed, then in the issue number 26, we discussed that there might be a single license for all repos. I'm not entirely sure what the policy is, or whether there is a policy at all.
yeah, so the correct policy is in 26. We've allowed Apache for everything, and other working groups can request exceptions to that.
Okay. In that case, we definitely should update the FAQ. If you can still see my screen, because I don't really mind, but I think it's at the moment it is inaccurate.
Yes, that definitely looks inaccurate.
So
I saw that you filed a bug for that, Baz. Thank you.
Yeah, I pinged. I only just saw that 10 or 20 minutes ago. So within GitHub, we have a preference for MIT simply because literally all of our repos are MIT licensed. So that would be the easiest thing from our side. I've asked our legal team for an opinion, but haven't heard back quite yet. How strong is the preference of the foundation to use Apache?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. So we haven't yet had a case where we've taken to the governing board to ask for an alternate license. So, I'm happy for this to be our first case for that. I don't know right off if there will be particular concerns. It might be a simple, MIT works as well. So, but if you want to take it to the governing board, why I'm happy to get that. We've got a meeting coming up, so we can get that on our agenda, or we can have an email conversation offline.
I think I would support taking this if that makes sense, Baz. And then I would just support having also just clarity here in general, right? If there are multiple licenses that are okay, then let's confirm that. The only reason we would not do this is the timeline, I think, that Baz has here.
And actually, come to think of it, we're about to talk about the CI Best Practices badge, which is also under MIT license. and has contributions from other folks, and we would have to request everybody to approve a license change in that case.
So we definitely need to reconcile this.
Yeah, so that will require signatures and coordination with a number of folks.
Yeah, and I remember the original discussions around choosing Apache was kind of just more of a like, everybody kind of went, well, Apache's good. Yeah, I'm good with that. That seems good. And it was more of like a default with an acknowledgement that, yeah, there's other ones like MIT and stuff, and it's okay. We want to know so that somebody's not out there choosing GPL or something for a project and introducing some complications there. So my guess is that this is probably okay, but yeah, we should clarify and document and do all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually speaking to our legal team on Friday about something unrelated, but I can just quickly sort of shoehorn this in. Is it too soon to hope for a decision by, say, the 4th of December, so we can just put the right license files in the repos before we open source them?
Our next governing board is on the 3rd of December, so I think we can for sure have a decision by then at that
Beautiful.
meeting. Yeah.
Actually, is there any reason we have to wait for that meeting? Because
No, I was about to say we could discuss it in email and potentially have something sooner. So I'd say December 3rd at the latest.
So it sounds like David might need an answer sooner than I do. I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, because I think MIT and Apache are pretty similar anyways. It would be nice to have that sort of approved list of like, yeah, we default to Apache, but if you want to use these other 2 or 1 or whatever it is, so that we don't have to keep having this discussion every single time.
I would agree with Ryan on that, especially if we're okay with Apache. As stated, MIT is very similar in spirit. So it would be nice to just be clear on that, only because I think things will keep coming back to us for this decision. And probably in that conversation, we may also want to talk about things on the other kind of end of the spectrum of licensing, what we want to do around folks that want to use GPL, because it will inevitably come up for us.
Does someone want to take the lead in summarizing and then sending an email to the governing board?
On licenses in general, or are these 2 issues?
Well, so we should definitely cover these 2 issues. So we should talk about MIT, and then so those are the more critical ones, and then we probably want to address the broader question, but we could do that separately. So I could ask for 2 different volunteers if that helps.
I mean, I'd be happy to write up something for the governing board. I mean, I suspect the issues are essentially the same. We've got 2 different projects. One is proposing MIT, which already has an MIT license. Is it okay to approve? There's no issue from the Linux Foundation's point of view. If it's an OSI license, it's fine.
Okay. Okay, yeah, if you can do that, and
why don't I draft up something, email it to you, just to make sure I don't waste the governing board's time. If that makes sense, then send it out to the governing board.
Does that process work for everyone? Does the TAC want to see it first as well?
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see it. I was going to volunteer to draft as well, but I'm not a member of the governing board, so then it might make conversations difficult. So,
well, I'm not a member of the governing board, but I can write emails.
Fair enough. But that sounds like a good plan. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Any other questions for Bas before we move on?
So the other 2 things on my list were just to make sure that we talk about the org ownership and potential media outreach. That's the only things I wanted to make sure we talk about.
Yes, let's talk about org ownership, actually. I know someone was asking what the repo name is, and it's not in OSSF. So do you want to discuss what your thoughts were around there? I know I saw a couple of posts about it.
Yeah, so the only reason for it not being in the OSSF org itself is because there is one repository for every CVE in the dataset. So that means that today we have 212 repositories for just one per CVE plus one of tooling repository. And that will quite quickly grow if everything goes to plan. And we didn't want to fill up the OSSF org with all these loose CVE repos.
Wait, sorry, did you say that there's one repo for every CEE or for every CVE?
That's correct. Yes. What we do is we basically create a fork for every repository in the dataset, noting that not all code that we have CVEs for lives in Git. Some of it lives on floppy disks, and some of it lives on Subversion. So that's why we wanted to create a mirror of it. And every repository is basically one vulnerable code base, has two branches on it, one tagged patched and one tagged vulnerable.
So I guess what's the question here? I mean, this approach seems fine. I think the process to get it kind of transferred over is just to add the Linux Foundation or Lindsay directly to the org, and then I think they can take care of pulling it in and hooking up automation. Is there anything beyond
I think the
that?
problem is that the problem practically is that we'd be adding 212 or however many repos to the org. So the average user who's trying to come and read about the OSSF now has 212 random repos about CVEs to look at.
Oh no, I just mean, is there any problem with leaving this as its own organization?
Right.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
I mean, not for me.
Perfect sense for organization. Yeah. Other objections
Yeah.
from anybody else?
No, sounds fair.
And then I will indeed, after Black Hat, after the conference is finished, put the right permissions in place, and then someone else can take it from there. What I want to prevent from happening is that we accidentally have a glitch in the next 2 weeks leading up to Black Hat, meaning that we can't open source it or that we can't actually get the work done. So I'd rather do the ownership after Black Hat rather than before.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Last item on the list is whether we want to do any type of media outreach from the OpenSSF's sort of point of view. I'm not quite sure how that would work, and I'm hoping that someone in this group might know.
That is a well-timed question. There has been discussion of that as of yesterday. So there's currently, and Kay and others feel free to jump in and add details here, but we were discussing in the planning committee yesterday the formality of the process of reaching out and doing blog posts and tweets and things like that. And so right now, I believe the plan is to form a marketing committee. Dan, I believe, put forth a proposal that's going to go out. So I think in the short term, probably coordinating with Kay, are you the right person to drive that? But eventually there will be a more formal process.
Yeah, and I would just recommend we do it through the planning committee while we're waiting for the more formal process. So ultimately the governing board has responsibility for marketing. And the planning committee is just a good place to kind of vet things. So we can, so what you can do, and what we've done for other projects just to help along the way. So we have a blog, and so we can add an item to the blog. We can also tweet about it, and then we can send an announcement out to the announcements at our OpenSSF mailing list. So those are the kind of things that we've done for marketing before. And you can send email to me directly, and I can coordinate with Lindsay, but I'd also want to just run it through the people on the planning committee to make sure everyone's aware.
So if I can add to this, I think part of what Bas is asking about is related to coordination with a PR firm. So typically when giving a talk at Black Hat, for example, especially when releasing a tool or disclosing major vulnerabilities, there tends to be embargoed conversations with mainstream or special tech media journalists. So like usually either a company's in-house PR firm or an organization's external PR firm. So in our case, I guess it would be Jennifer Clower, who did the press releases for us, will coordinate with journalists. So basically they serve as a middleman to communicate the overview of the upcoming research to interested journalists and to set up some of the media interviews. So I think one of the questions that we have to address is, do we as OpenSSF have like funding or support for PR beyond the press releases? Like, are we able to make use of that external media firm, or would it make sense for the authors of the tool to work with their company's like internal PR firm? So we either need to, if we know that, we can share that information now, or we'll probably just have to ask Lindsay about what our options are.
Yeah, I think we need to ask Lindsay. Let's see. So that's, is it, I think, so you've got some information in the issue. Maybe if you can just, send a quick email to me and to Lindsay, and then we'll sort it out from there.
Lindsay, I'm not
It's
sure.
Sure. Lindsay is our from the Linux Foundation. She does a lot of project management and operational support for us. Her email address is lmays@linuxfoundation.org.
LMAYS@Linux Foundation.
Right. And if you have any
And,
trouble with that, if you just send it to me, I'll make sure to loop her in. So
Sure thing. I will definitely do that. Probably not today, more likely tomorrow, the day after.
Okay.
But that's great. And indeed, I mean, if we decide as the OpenSSF as an organization, we don't want to make a big song and dance about this, then that's absolutely fine as well. It's just something to make sure that we coordinate rather than do the same effort twice.
I think we'd like to. So we'll proceed on that assumption.
Fantastic.
We're just working through the process for it.
All right. Any more questions from me? Because I can leave you to your meeting if that's the best next thing to do.
No, but thank you. not for me, but thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, really.
You're very welcome.
Really cool project. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see it grow.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your support on this one. It's been really great to work with you all and the other partners in the working group.
Thank you.
Right, I'll drop off now, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Boz.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, with that, we'll carry on. Let me share the agenda here. What we've got coming up. Okay, can everybody see my screen now? All right. So again, thank you, Bass, for that. So real quick, the CII best practices badge, I think this should go fairly quickly. I think everybody saw over email that the working groups actually got together and discussed this and came up with a plan themselves. And we fortunately have Krob here today. Krob, are you still on the line?
I am.
Would you like to summarize real quick for everyone what you and Michael Scavetta had decided to do?
Yeah, we had a chat via email, Michael and Zav and I, and we agreed that the infrastructure piece, the actual kind of dashboarding component, best lies within the metrics group, and that's not a task they're looking to grapple with yet. That's kind of a future thing. And then the actual kind of developer good practices that are at the core of what the badging project is about, that's going to be not curated, but we're going to have participation from the developer best practice working group to help maintain that and help kind of steer those things. And then at some point in the future, we'll have some conversations about, do we need to technically move repositories around, or what do we need to do to help the metrics project kind of start to be able to advertise these types of information or leverage the data that's inside the repo. So yeah, good discussion. I think we came to an agreeable and logical kind of separation of duties here.
No, that sounds great, and I'm glad that you guys were able to reach that together.
Yeah, just trying to catch up via emails, challenging sometimes.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Time zones and whatnot.
So from the TAC side, does anyone have any concerns with that plan going forward? I mean, it sounds reasonable to me as far as being able to, each group has an area of focus and then continued integration, which makes a lot of sense.
So I have one broader question, and this kind of involves the scorecard too. So it's confusing to me, at least, about the kind of the charters of the two groups. And so the charter for the best practices group seems to be around education, and someone has a keyboard that's super loud. And okay. Anyway, so the charter for best practices around education and training, if you read the charter, and then the charter for the identifying security threats group is around security metrics and providing information. And so it just feels to me like we're not being clear about, if something is a metrics related project, it feels like it should be in the group that's focused on metrics. And if it's, education and training, it should be in that group. But maybe that's just me, but it seems like it's worth just having that conversation as well. So maybe that bleeds into what you had on your as another discussion topic, Ryan.
Yeah, it's a fair question. And I can say too, I think I was definitely in the same camp as you for pretty much most of that. And then going back and sort of watching I think it was the meeting that I was not at, the TAC meeting I was not at when I was sick, was when the groups came in and kind of discussed. And there was a lot of comments that I heard in there that people who had gone through the badging program actually felt like it wasn't so much a metric gathering of they were getting a score proving that their project did something, but it was actually more educational for them, that as they went through the process, they were learning about the best practices that they were supposed to be doing. And so my understanding of that was that that's kind of why that aligns a little bit better, because it's defining best practices. And so the badging program is doing that, but then there is a data piece of it that will feed to the metrics dashboard. But as far as owning of the program and updating what those best practices are, it seemed like the groups decided it made more sense to sit within best practices, but then that data will get fed to the metric group. So that was my understanding of it, and that to me helped me reconcile the two, because I agree with you initially as well, but that kind of turned the corner for me. So of course, other people, curious what your thoughts are and how you guys view it, and if there's controversy here.
Luke here. I'm perfectly okay with the proposal. I think we should move forward with this and let the guys get to work.
I agree. Proposal sounds good to me.
I just don't understand what this means in practice, because it seems like you've got one project with one repo with one maintainer, and now you're sort of splitting that in two. What does that mean in practice?
So I think it's a little different, actually. In fact, it might even be worse than what you're describing, in the sense that there's one repo for best practices as far as they have a training programs that they work on. And then the CII best practices that David Wheeler is in charge of is a whole separate thing entirely. And that code hasn't even moved over to OSSF. And then separately, there is the identifying security threats working group, and they have a repo for their dashboard project and their metrics project. So those things are very distinct right now, but I think code-wise it does make sense. But as Krob was mentioning, going forward, there may need to be some sort of integration to pull some of those things together code-wise. But also, having worked on a number of complex projects, it's not uncommon, right, to have one sort of centralized project that pulls from multiple repos to build together so you have the full package. And keeping them separate might allow people to focus on specific areas without it feeling too intimidating. So I don't know.
I think Dan's question was actually, I think his question was, the best practices program is one repo today, the CI best practices badge. Mm-hmm. What are we saying about the future of that repo? Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, so I think with how open source works that I've experienced is it always comes down to who's got hands that are actually going to do something, as opposed to like organizationally how we think of structuring things within our companies. So right now I'm trying to understand, Krob, you said something about the infrastructure piece goes to metrics. Well, does that mean something in actual?
Today, at least as Michael described it, that wasn't the highest in their backlog that they wanted to address at the moment. That was a future problem they wanted to tackle. We have a group of people that are very enthusiastically participating with the best practices to help curate standards and requirements and kind of help coordinate training. So, there's an immediate boost there that we can help David Wheeler kind of help curate and augment what the best practices badge program is encompassing. And we agreed that at some future point, if it makes sense, if the metrics team wanted to take ownership or needed to have a more involvement, that was definitely a possibility. And all of this ultimately, from my perspective, is up to Dave Wheeler. If he's the kind of the leader of the project, if he wanted to see that happen, great. If he doesn't, I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah, and my understanding of what this really means is that I'm leading the best practices badge work, and I show up as part of the best practices working group and coordinate with, and we work back and forth. And I also intend very much to work with the metrics group. In fact, I've already done that. Dan Lawrence, as I've previously talked, we made some changes to the best practices badge to make sure the metrics could be easily extracted in ways that they wanted. There's no requirement that a working group have only one repo, by the way. Working groups typically have many repos over time, and that's not a problem.
I also think we're getting a little bit too much caught up in who owns this. I mean, these really, if we boil this down, they're open source projects. Anybody can make a pull request to them, the communities. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we should be too focused in on having specific owners for things.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I think, and in that spirit too, like I've said before, like working groups are kind of arbitrary lines, right? And ownership are sort of lines in the sand that are blurry at best, right? So everybody's working on these projects, but I think we should organize them in a way that makes sense technically. And if that works, great. Like who the quote owner is less relevant. I think if we all agree that the plan so far for the groups to move forward makes sense, let's just let them go and do that. And I think as these things come up, the working groups can sort them out. But from my perspective, as the TAC, I don't feel like we have to solve that for them. I think that's up to the working groups to decide. Unless we see some sort of conflict between the groups, right, where we're duplicating work or something like that, maybe we have an opinion about that. But as is, everything looks pretty good for me so far, right? It's iterative, right? So they'll figure it out.
Okay, and I'm hearing a general consensus from the TAC that this makes sense, at least to start with.
Agreed.
I think so. Yeah. Let's let the groups get on with doing what they do best.
Agreed.
Practically, is there a need for a vote or anything like that, or are we good to go?
I don't think we need to vote personally. It sounds like everybody's in agreement. I think the working groups have kind of made that decision, which brings up a broader question. So it's sort of the next item after the next one, but that's role of the TAC and process discussion. So we can talk about that real quick if it makes sense. My personal opinion on this is that I think we should let working groups decide. And I think I said this in an email a week or two ago as well, but working groups should be the ones driving the change and the TAC should be aware of it. But I don't believe that the TAC should be the guys deciding what everybody's doing and how they get structured. If the groups decide the people doing the work are in agreement, then we should be cool with that. I think if we have to take things to a vote, there should have been a significant conflict in order to justify that. What are other thoughts?
I agree. Yeah, that sounds pragmatic to me. And if the folks do hit an issue as they sort of collaborate on these two parts of the project, then that can come to the TAC.
Yeah,
I agree.
that's exactly
I
my
see
thought.
we're decision breakers, like tiebreakers.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I think what happened with the best practices badging program that led to a lot of the conflict, I think, was because it got brought to the TAC first instead of being brought to the working groups to try to work it out first. And then once the working groups got together to actually work it out, everything was fine. So I think that's the right approach, and sounds like most are in agreement. Is anybody opposed to that strategy? Going once, going twice. All right, so we will let working groups work. All right, so the next thing on the agenda, the technical strategy update. I'm just going to touch on this real quick, so I'd like to try to leave some time for these charter template discussions at the end if we have time. So I sent out a mail last week sort of detailing where I think our strategy will go, but by no means am I the decision maker on this. These are just thoughts on paper, stake in the ground to have a conversation. So I identified a few themes on that. What I'd like to talk about is what does the TAC think as far as process to get us to deciding what that ultimate strategy should be for the next year? Are we happy with it? How detailed do we want to get? So I'm opening this up for conversation because I think there's a lot of different opinions here, and I'd really like to kind of hear where folks are at with their thought process. And then we also have a press release coming out at the end of January. So how close can we get to making that decision by then so that we can hopefully get that published out? First off, did folks have a chance to read that mail?
So I read the mail in the doc and I'm a little confused. David and I emailed a little bit on the thread about it. I guess I'm a little confused at the kind of structure and approach there. Like we're proposing a bunch of work and, you know, there's a bunch of text in there about picking things to work on, but who's going to be working on these things? It kind of feels like we're trying to assign work in that document to people and to working groups rather than the other way of letting people, you know, work on what they want to work on.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely not the intent. So let me clarify that. So I think what we'd like to do is basically start with what we decide is the strategy, right? So we're going to focus on educational type projects along with providing metric things, and we'll be proactive with security reviews, you know, that type of stuff, whatever those themes are. So as a TAC, we could decide that's kind of our focus for the next year. And then that document that David graciously put together is really like a backlog. It's like, so here's all the stuff that we've talked about. Like, we don't want to lose track of that. And I think we should formalize it at some point, get it out of a document, put it in issues or however we want to do it. But we have a list of work that we could do. And with a strategy in mind, we could cherry pick a few of those things and say, if anybody's interested in working on these, I think, you know, we as a TAC think these would be the next things to go tackle, but we're certainly not assigning work. It's really just identifying possibilities.
I really like the idea of, based on some of the things outlined in this document, us having maybe one like dedicated session of the TAC where we talk about the overall space in which we're working, the things that we had been interested in achieving when we initially joined this group, some of the other things that we see happening that are related in the industry, and kind of just mapping the territory and seeing what is possible. I don't know if that turns into assigning work per se, because certainly people should be kind of grassroots bringing forward things they want to work on with us. But I think it's definitely not a waste of time for us to spend an hour or whatever it is together discussing where this could potentially go and what we could love to see. Because one thing I've really learned in my current role is that as much as you want to always empower sort of bottom up kind of raising of ideas, there's something to be said for having a vision and painting that picture for people. So I think it could be valuable for us to come up with an overall idea of what we'd like to achieve and put that vision out there, perhaps as a short written artifact or presented at a town hall or something like that, because I believe it can inspire people.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any other thoughts or opinions on the approach or having a strategy or not? Or
I like having a strategy. I like saying, here's where we're trying to go. We're never going to be able to do everything that's in that document, like anytime soon.
exactly.
So I think as long as we're expectation setting in that regard, then I'm fine.
Yeah, to be fair, it says that right at the beginning. There is no way, but I think there is a reason to do this document. If for no other reason, then I think some very, very good ideas have been posted by many different folks, and it's easy to lose sight of that. So I think if nothing else, the here it is in one place, and now those ideas won't be lost. I think will be comforting for a lot of people and hopefully inspirational.
Yeah, and maybe like as we think about ways of sharing this, maybe we share it like as a wish list where people may come in and want to contribute. They may find their place in existing working groups, or they may want to start something new. And maybe we have kind of a wish list of things that we've crowdsourced as interesting problems to work on that no one is working on right now.
Yeah, I want to second that part. I guess I could see us publishing this as a wish list or like a list of unsolved gaps that we've identified, and kind of publishing that as an artifact. And I think that would be pretty good and useful for people to see and maybe get inspired by and jump off on and actually start working.
Cool. So do folks want to, do we want to keep this in that document? Do we want to change the format of it or move it to GitHub as an MD file or a list of issues? How do folks really want to, because I mean, the document's great and I don't want to lose any of the details in there, but in terms of making it maybe more approachable for people to find work, are we comfortable with how it is, or do we want to move it somewhere else?
I think we need to move to a place where each one is separated out, so that maybe we can even vote on it, upon on it, so that we can even tie back to the funding initiative we have, right? If a organization or a company really interested about idea, they could maybe come forwards to fund that project. So I think keeping somewhere like where each individual is a separate entity, I like to see that rather than one big document. So maybe
if I can push back on that a little bit, the problem is it's actually going to be quite a bit of work to create a whole bunch of issues, one for each of these. And when you create issues, of course, they get immediately atomized into just that one issue. You don't see the bigger picture. I am guessing, and this is somebody who wrote a significant portion, I'm guessing that we are not going to do all of these things in 5 years, maybe not in 10. And so I think it actually would be simpler to have it as a longer document. And then as people pull out parts that they're going to work on, absolutely turn that into an issue or a project or whatever. But I think it'd be a whole lot of work to create a whole bunch of issues, especially since I don't expect the majority of them to be worked on anytime soon.
Issues may be a bad choice, right? But is there any other option, like as Jennifer said, like a wish list kind of things, like list of ideas or projects?
Yeah, so maybe like a hybrid, kind of what you both are suggesting of, we keep this document, maybe we change the structure a little bit, just so maybe table of contents or however we make it more approachable for people to find things. And then like what you're saying, David, and what Jennifer's saying, we could actually proactively pull out a few that say, this is the wish list for our strategy for 2021. These are the things the areas we'd like to focus on, and we could pull those out into either issues or something, but that would only be like, 5 to 10 items, something very manageable. Right?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I just don't want to go through all the work of pulling out every single one, knowing that almost none of that's going to be useful in any way. I hate useless work.
Concretely though, what does it mean if we say these are 5 things we want to focus on? Like, who's going to focus on them?
So it's not assigning work, right? It's like Jennifer said, it's aspirational, right? It should say these are the areas that we would like to see work happen, because in our strategy of trying to target these things, the strategy we have yet to decide on, these are projects that would help further bolster that strategy. And so we would like to see people work on those things. But again, it's open source, right? So anybody can work on it or not, but we're not saying somebody has to, but we would like them to. And it could be new people from the community see that and say, hey, I'm really good at that, and they'll come help do that. Or people within existing working groups say, oh, that seems related to something I'm doing, and they could pull it in. But it's really just, it's there for people to see. and know that's the direction that we want to head, and they have the opportunity to work on it.
And for a couple
I
of
propose
these,
that we put this into a markdown file, this, you know, the long version, the 5-year or whatever plan you want to call it. If people have work that they're currently doing, they can suggest an edit to the file and link out to that work, whether that's an issue in one of the repos, an issue, you know, somewhere else, etc. So we at least have a central place to see what's going on. And then separately around the idea of kind of like priorities for 2020, that's almost to me sounds like a blog post or something. Sorry,
Yeah.
for 2021, that sounds like a blog post or something like that. It's great to talk about the tactical part of this. I would really like to spend maybe next TAC on the content of this and go through the items, if that makes sense, or whenever is appropriate.
Yeah, I would love that too, Maya, because like I feel that we haven't spent enough time on this kind of thing yet. I know that early on in the open source security coalition, like the way we ended up with the 6 groups or 5 groups that we ended up having was at the very beginning, before any of us had met each other, we filled in a survey, and Nico and Hawa were great at kind of filtering through that and identifying themes and things like that. But I don't know if we've ever since that time really stepped back, and certainly not as the new larger group that we are now, stepped back and had a real conversation about what we want to achieve. And of course, like a lot of it is implied by the work that we do, but I mean, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the conversations we've had have been very tactical thus far. And I would really value, if people are interested, obviously, if people are not interested, don't let me waste your time with it. But like, if it was something that we had shared interest in, I think it would be a valuable way to spend an hour or whatever amount of time bringing everyone that are in this meeting together and just talking about, you know, technical and strategic things we'd like to achieve.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that was very much the intent of starting off with that email. So I wanted to have this conversation now, and then if we can evolve or work on this over email in the next 2 weeks, people can produce documents however we want to do that. And then in the next TAC meeting, absolutely, I'd like to get us to a point where we can start defining what that strategy is, either, you know, distilling it down to a phrase or a paragraph, you know, whatever people are comfortable with and how we can articulate that. But I think that that is the right thing to do. We look at what the existing working groups are, what's the themes there, and then what is additional work that we might want to go, and then that becomes the strategy. Are people comfortable with that? Do we want to take the start of the EL I wrote last week and continue the conversation on there? Should we start a document that people can kind of party on over the next 2 weeks, and then we can come back at the next meeting and refine?
I like Maya's idea of the editable markdown file for everyone.
Oh yeah, so I like that idea too for the list of everything for future, but more as far as just, or do you want to do the strategy in that part as well? Is that what you're saying?
I'm down with either approach, honestly.
Let me, if I can just chime in, not at the detail level, but at the, you know, what it is that we, so we're on a cadence where we, every 3 months, we are, you know, planning to do press releases and town halls. And so for our next press release, I'm hoping that we can have a technical vision that, so a document that we're willing to present kind of to the world that says, here's the OpenSSF technical vision. And it is kind of a longer term vision. So, you know, maybe we want to talk about 1 year, but also, you know, maybe 5 year. Here's where we see the OpenSSF going. Here's our vision. And then we can back that up with details. But my request from you know, what we want to present publicly to the world is, you know, let's talk about our technical vision.
And sorry, you mentioned a date there, Kay. When was the timeline that you had envisioned potentially for us doing this?
Yeah, so the next press release is the end of January, and we need to have things buttoned down 2 weeks ahead of that. So, I mean, we might decide that that's just too soon and we can't get to that by then. But that would be our next opportunity to share that publicly. So
I think we should try to make that date. So in the last minute that we have here, real quick, I think there's some good ideas here of how we can move forward. Getting the document into Markdown that people can kind of party on is a great idea. We can figure out how exactly we want to do the strategy part. What I'd like to figure out real quick here is, what are folks' preferences as far as iterating and doing work in the 2 weeks between meetings, because we have a ton of stuff to get through, and clearly an hour is not enough to get through everything. It seems like there's very limited discussion over email, but I see a lot of people like to comment on issues, and there's good discussions that happen there on GitHub. What are folks' preferences as far as being able to move through this? Comments and documents, discussion on GitHub, or continue attempting to use email?
I prefer to do comments and documents and discussion on GitHub. What I find hard is when we have a new document between meetings and I have no idea how important it is. So maybe if such a thing occurs, like just now, we all talked about this. Sounds like there will be a document that we can go iterate in. Now I know to kind of put that on my to-do list for the next 2 weeks. So that makes any sense.
Okay.
And you don't have to wait till a conversion to Markdown. It's in Google Docs now. You can just start.
Understood. Understood. I just mean, like, because there's a lot of things floating around. I don't necessarily know what is the most important or time bound.
Sure.
Okay, so I think maybe the best approach then is I can create a central issue on GitHub in the TAC repo that identifies the strategy. I'll copy pieces of my email and put in there, and then David's document, we can link it together. We can have conversation on there, and then we'll come back in 2 weeks, and hopefully we've made progress in the community on GitHub, and then kind of go from there. Everybody comfortable with that?
It sounded like things just get fractured into two places. There's the document and a Google issue, or a GitHub issue rather. Would it be easier just to have, here's the strategy document and all the editing's in one place?
So the editings can all happen in the document. Yeah, I'm totally cool with that. I was just going to create the one issue that has links to both things. But if folks just want the document and we can send it out via email, that's fine too.
It makes sense to me that you'd have an issue that has links to, I think there are two documents. One is here's the long list of issues, and the other is here's our vision. So I think.
Right.
Yep.
Right. The investment, the initiative options is the big one. The strategies, I presume, is going to be a short one.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's either going to distill down into a catchphrase or maybe a paragraph at most, I hope. So, all right, we'll start with that. And we're out of time. So we'll start with that. And then obviously we can communicate in the next 2 weeks. And this isn't set in stone. So thank you everybody for your time. I really appreciate it. I think this was productive, and we'll get to a rhythm of being able to continue on and not just solving in only these meetings, but actually getting some work done in between. So thank you, everybody. And of course, reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ryan. Bye.